He came back to school after, I'll let you tell that if you want to, but he's an outstanding gospel preacher, does a marvelous, always something worth listening to. I'll tell you something I heard from Bill years ago, and I've used this. And he said, I only have 2 sermons: how to be saved and how to stay saved. And there's a lot of truth in that. And so but every time I've used that, Bill, I give you accreditation for it. So I don't steal that. Those of you, if you're kind of behind him, guys over here, if y'all want to, y'all can move. If you want to stay where you are, you're fine. But we're glad that you're here. I told Bill he has 45 minutes or so. Once he finishes, you'll have a little bit of time before the end, so you can go get some snacks. You can stand around and talk, whatever you want to do. And then we'll come back in here. I think about 15 minutes before the end, we'll all assemble back in here. So just keep that in mind. Bill, glad to have you with us tonight. Come speak to us.
Thank you, Tom. I learned a long time ago that it's either Tom or Thomas. It's not Tommy. And so I told him when I found out that was his predilection, I said, well, I'm Bill or I'm William, but I'm not Billy. So he finds some opportunity every so often to call me Billy. But I'm not going to do that to him. I won't call him Billy. Might call him Tommy. No, I wouldn't do it. It's good to see you all tonight, and thank you for the invitation. Appreciate the invitation of the elders for us to come over. We'll be primarily in Genesis 13 tonight. This is just going to be a Bible class about Lot's choices. That's all it's going to be. The place we're going to really get started, though, I think it's kind of an unusual passage when you really look at what it refers to, is 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 7 and 8. And the Bible says, going back to verse 6, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them with an overthrow, making them an ensample unto those that after should live ungodly. In other words, Sodom and Gomorrah, what happened to them was an example about not obeying God, not living for God. And then he said in verse 7, Peter says, and delivered just Lot. That's not just Lot. It's Lot that was a just man, just Lot, vexed with filthy conversation of the wicked. For that righteous man, dwelling among them, in seeing and hearing, vexed his righteous soul from day to day with their unlawful deeds. Now we remember Lot from Genesis chapter 13 for making a decision that could be considered selfish. Do you remember the situation? Abraham, of course, starts Ur of Chaldees, Haran, coming down in, spends time in Egypt, and comes up into the portion of that we refer to as Israel. And Abraham becomes very, very wealthy. He becomes very successful. But he has his nephew Lot with him. And with Lot being with him, what they have together, all the material they have together, the people, the animals, the resources, it's too much for one particular area. So Genesis chapter 13 deals with this question of what are they going to do about that. And what they're going to do is they're going to make a choice. They're going to give Lot an opportunity to make a decision. And when I was told about what our Vacation Bible School, I know what the children are studying this matter of choice. It's a choice that Lot made. Just think about that. You and I are capable of assimilating information and making decisions about that information. We make choices every day. And it's a fascinating thing to me that God made us. He didn't make us automatons. He didn't make us robots. He made us with the ability to look at the world that we're in, to ascertain what's going on, and to make decisions. This is a remarkable thing. Now, in the animal kingdom, you don't have decision making. What you have is reaction. We have a cat at our house, and he's substantial. I think he weighs about 17 or 18 pounds, and he's a big yellow cat, and his name is Meatball. Now, Meatball doesn't make choices. He reacts to circumstances. Now, I know some cat lovers say, no, they think just like we do. Meatball doesn't think just like we do. He reacts to circumstances. When he sees me get up in the morning to go down and fix the coffee, he comes with me, not out of some deep-seated love and abiding affection for me. He comes with me because he cannot reach the bag of treats, cat treats, that's on top of the refrigerator. So he reacts to the circumstances that he's in. You say, well, he decided to do that. No, he's reacting. There's a difference between making a choice and simply reacting. In Genesis chapter 13, let's read this passage and keep it in our minds as we go through this material. Then Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him to the south. Now, that sounds odd to us, because if we look on a map, it looks like if he went up from Egypt, he would be going which direction? North. But he's going to an area called the south, or the Negev. And so he's going to that place. Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. And he went on his journey from the south as far as Bethel, and to the place where his tent had been in the beginning between Bethel and Ai. If you look on the maps in the back of your Bible, you know where Bethel is. It's up in the northern part. So he's talking about the whole area of Palestine, that whole area. To the place of the altar which he had made there at first. And Abram called on the name of the Lord. Lot also, who went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. When it says he had tents, reading from the New King James, that means he had people with him. So we have a bunch of folks. We've got Abram's folks. He's not Abraham just yet. We've got Abram's folks. We've got Lot's folks. We've got a lot of people. A lot of people. We've got a land. If you remember by looking in your map, it's not the biggest land in the world. It's not all that huge. But it becomes apparent early on that there's not enough area to sustain both situations if they stayed together. If they stayed together. Now the land was not able, verse 6 says, now the land was not able to support them, that they might dwell together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. Well, you put that kind of population together, there's going to be some strife, some difficulty. There's going to be some problem. But also, in addition to that, there were the people that they were sort of uprooting there, the Canaanites and the Perizzites, these people that dwelt in the land. So you had Lot's folks, you had Abram's folks, you had the Canaanites, you had the Perizzites. So there's a lot of people, and it's going to get complicated. It's going to get difficult. And so Abram said to Lot, please let there be no strife between me, between you and me, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brethren. The old translation said, for we be brethren. And I love that expression. And because what it does, it reminds you by using the verb to be that they were brethren. It wasn't something that they decided to be. They were brethren from the very beginning. And then he says, is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. This is Abram speaking. Please separate from me. If you take the left, I will go to the right. If you go to the right, I will go to the left. And Lot lifted his eyes and saw all the plain of Jordan. Now, the plain of Jordan, you look at a map and you can see what it's talking about. He's talking about the plain of land that runs down to the Jordan River. Now, the Jordan River, most places, is not a very big river. As a matter of fact, I've only seen it one time in my life. I'll probably never see it again. But actually, you could easily just wade right across it, unless it was really raging. It's a small river in a lot of places. Some places it's a larger river, but in all places it is the river that drains all the land around it. So consequently, it's a significant body of water. And the land around it is one of the few reliably watered areas of land. So Lot looks and saw the plain of Jordan. The text itself says, and that it was watered everywhere. And this, in that note that's in there, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt as you go toward Zoar. So in other words, the way this is written in Genesis chapter 13, this area that Lot ended up choosing was the best looking land around there. And so then Lot chose for himself. And I think I want to talk about that in a minute. And I don't want to get too boring, but I probably will. But notice it says Lot chose for himself. He made a decision for himself. There's an entire realm of psychological, philosophical study about humans and their ability to choose. Lot chose for himself all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated from each other. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent even as far as Sodom. Okay, that's the account. That's the account. Now, choose wisely. We know that he didn't choose wisely, but that comes later. And I want us to talk about choice, first of all, generically. Just the idea of choice, of choosing. Because as children of God, we must use a different fundamental basis to make up our minds about the choices that we make. I can't make choices like a worldly person. I'm not allowed by God to make choices like a person that doesn't have the teachings of Christ in his or her heart. So we need to think about choice, the ability that we have to rationally consider alternatives. And we make choices all the time. Up and down, that's an easy one, isn't it? I was talking to a friend of mine at one of our elders, a good friend, a long time. Rusty Johnson worked in the computer world for many years. And it's a fascinating thing to think about how the simple matter of choice has come down to be so significant and important in everything we do in the computer world. Those machines are making choices. You've heard about these data farms, you know. And I have friends in Virginia, and sometimes people aren't enjoying the presence of the data farm. But what are those? What is a data farm, fellas? Bound to be some guys that are in that business in this room. What's a data farm? It's buildings with machines in them, and what are those machines doing? They're making decisions between 1 and 0, or on and off, or as somebody said, looking for an offset from some point. And when my computer buddy told me that, I had no idea what he was talking about. But it's simply the way so much is going on. It's like our phones, everything that they do, how complex all that is. We live in a world of ones and zeros. And we live in a world of choices. And it's rather fascinating. But Lot made his choice. And what was the problem with his choice? The problem wasn't immediately apparent, was it? But it developed to be apparent because he chose to be too close to sin. We all understand this. We like living in the country. We also like being able to get close to town. And why do we want to get close to town? Because that's where all the stuff is. And we want to be able to make our choice so that we can have access to that choice. But we have to understand that there is what I like to call a consequent nature of choice. Every decision that we make is going to have consequences. Every choice that we make is going to have consequences. Some of our choices are inconsequential. If you know me, you know I like ice cream. I like ice cream. I like almost any ice cream. Most ice creams are pretty good. Buttered pecan is my present favorite. But at other times, it's been different things. That choice is inconsequential. Actually, my view is as long as I have some ice cream, I'm pleased with the situation. But there are, most choices are indeed very consequential. Tom was talking about the time we were together at Freed Hardeman. It was a fascinating experience in my life. I think I've told y'all before that I became a Christian after I met Ginger and before we married. And she's the one who really got me to study with the preacher. And Roger McKenzie was his name. And I obeyed the gospel because she was very clear. And she had made a decision somewhere along the line, a long time before I met her. She had made a decision that she was not going to marry anybody. And I don't really think she liked to hang out with anybody that wasn't a member of the Lord's church. I mean, she grew up in a little tiny church. Tiny church, much smaller than this one, in Eufaula, Alabama, on Orange Street. And she grew up in a little church, but she was altogether faithful, and faithful in a calm, rational fashion. It stunned me to see the level of faithfulness that she had, and she was, usually back in that day, back in the 70s, when I saw somebody who was a real rabid Christian, they weren't very nice to be around sometimes because they were just so overexcited about everything, you know. Well, she was just cool as a cucumber. And it was just one of these deals where I'm only going to marry a Christian. And as I said, she didn't even really want to hang out with somebody who wasn't a Christian. Now, I had to make a choice. Do I see my way through this situation with her and see what's on the other side of it? Or do I just, like I had normally done when I ran into somebody who seemed to me to take religion too seriously? You know what that means? You know, I thought, I ran into a lot of people that I thought took it too seriously. I just usually exited from that situation. But there was something about her that intrigued me. And then I met her friends, and they were most of them. Some of them were nuts, but most of them were good folks who were enjoyable to be around. And the other thing about it was that she was a she's going to kill me. She was a beautiful blonde. You see, you look at the situation, the matter of choices. Now they're beautiful brunettes, but she was a beautiful blonde, and to me that was much more interesting to me than the other. That's a choice you make, and if you have brunette friends, it's better not to talk about that. but nonetheless, when I saw her, I said, well, let's see where this leads. And then a fascinating thing, that choice of deciding simply because here I am in my late 20s, and I've met this girl. She came into the furniture store I was running. I've met this girl. She's a very nice person. She's a school teacher, teaches in a Christian school, and she was intriguing to me. And I realized that I wasn't really going to be able to live the way I was living successfully, the way I was living before I met her. So I made a decision. I made a decision to follow through and see what would happen if I hung in there with her. Well, I met more people like her, and most of them were very pleasant. But then I ran into a philosophical perspective about God and the Bible that I had not run into before with my other religious friends. And I had plenty of religious friends, but I hadn't run into this before. And so one decision, the decision to find out how she was and to be with her and see how it goes, led to a number of other decisions that resulted ultimately in my obeying the gospel. And once I became a Christian, we stayed friends and dated, and ultimately I had to beg her to marry me. It was terrible. It was something else. But nonetheless, I'd been a salesman a long time, and I figured I'm not letting this deal get away. And so, but anyway, here we are now, today, all these years later. Based on what kind of decision? It was a decision that was a rational decision from the point of view of examining the way my life was going at that time and meeting some people who I could see their lives were going better in terms of their satisfaction with what they were seeing in their lives. Their lives were they were calmer, they were more settled, and so forth in terms because of and it came because of the relationship with Christ that they had. And so one decision led to another. And so that's the phenomenon of choice. And it's a remarkable thing. Now, with Abram and Lot, that choice was motivated by the fact they had too much stuff. Abram's wisdom there in verse 9 of chapter 13 was, he said, the whole land is before us. You take your whatever you want, I'll take whatever left. He saw that, what do you think? This is a Bible class, we can talk. What do you think Abram saw in Lot that made him say what he did in verse 9? I'll read verse 9 again for you. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If you take the left, I will go to the right. Or if you go to the right, then I will go to the left. What do you think? This is one of these things where you examine why a man makes a choice that he does. We're talking about Abram's choice. Why did he say it that way? What was in his head concerning this particular circumstance of having to make a choice? What do you think? I think it... Say it again. Somebody had to make a decision. It tells us something exactly right. It tells us something about Abram, and it tells us something about Lot. Based on what happened in this circumstance, who was the most intelligent person, Abram or Lot? Abram. And that's not just because he ended up being Abraham. It's because he's the one who placed the decision before Lot. He knew that Lot did not have the level of maturity to do the right thing without having the opportunity to see some possible material advantage. That's the way. Now, Lot was a righteous man according to Peter, and Peter's inspired. But Lot had to learn some stuff. And this is part of the process where Lot is learning. At this point, however, you look at these decisions, these choices. Abram's choice was based on wisdom. Wisdom. Lot's choice was based on what's best for me. And that's the foundation of choice. That's why I say the fact that human beings have been made by God with the ability to involve themselves in the phenomenon of choice is a remarkable thing. I'll tell you a little story. There was when I was in graduate school for history, this was long after Tom and I met, and but we were had to take this class. Well, you had to take a lot of classes, but I had to take this one class where we were studying the history of the labor movement in the South. The labor movement in the South. And I think most of us know, either through experience, listening to our parents or our grandparents, that it was kind of a tough situation in some instances. Some of the plants and things like that went through. Well, there was a fellow that was a labor organizer. Now, there was a period of time back in the 20s and 30s of the previous century that if you were a labor organizer, that put you in a bad way with a whole lot of people. And you could get yourself beat up. You may remember reading about Henry Ford had his people come in and beat up the labor organizers, and the labor organizers had their people come in and beat up Henry Ford's. This stuff was going on all over the country. Well, this one particular fellow who was rather intellectual in his orientation to these problems, he made some decisions that were contrary to his own best interest. Just like Abram made a decision that was contrary to his own best interest. And this is the funny part of it. So I wrote a paper, and Ginger typed it. I didn't type it. I wrote it out, and she typed it. But I wrote a paper about this fella, and entitled, the key to the paper was, An Example of the Phenomenon of Choice, wherein a person chooses to do something against his own best interest. In other words, let the other fellow win. Let the other fellow win. If you can possibly do it, let the other fellow win, even though it's going to diminish you in some fashion. It's a rather Christian perspective to do that, to let the other guy win, if you possibly can. And what you end up doing is having a lot more peace. Well, anyway, the guy that was grading, that was my instructor, my professor, he was a little bit upset and agitated with me anyway, because I would from time to time bring up a biblical example in class. And he did not believe that the Bible was anything at all. So, but ultimately I won him over, not on the Bible, but I won him over in terms of cutting me a little slack. But nonetheless, I wrote this paper on the phenomenon of choice, and I must say it was rather good. But I got a B minus. It was an A if I ever saw one. And so, but nonetheless, this concept of see, he believed, not my professor at that time, he believed that human beings are like meatball. You remember meatball that I mentioned earlier? He believed that human beings are reactive, that we do things based on the circumstances we're in, reacting to whatever it is, whether it might advantage us. We do things that advantage us, and we don't do things that disadvantage us. I mean, he really believed that, because that's what most academic people believe, and that's what most philosophies that are taught in universities present as human motivation. You are motivated based on what's best for you. But you're not, are you? Not if you're out here at VBS at Union on this night. You're not motivated by that. You're motivated by what do we call it? By what's right. By what's right. And that was the thesis of my paper. And that, of course, gets us back to this first big phenomenon of choice that we see here in this text. Abram was motivated by what was best for Lot and what was best for the circumstances. And the fact that Lot made a bad choice was a terrible thing, and he had to pay for it. As a matter of fact, we remember that after Abraham received Canaan, that there was a war that followed in chapter 14, and the enemies of Abram, they took everything, including Lot. And who had to rescue Lot? Abram. He had to rescue Lot. So here is a situation where this concept of choosing wisely, Abram chose wisely, but not from a material perspective. He chose wisely from what perspective? Spiritual. What Abram chose to do was right. And, he rescued Lot. He met Melchizedek. and all sorts of things along that line. Now, what about us today? What about our choices, our situations? People make decisions. As a matter of fact, I'll just tell you, there are entire shelves of books about what we're talking about right now. The phenomenon of decision making by human beings. And why is that important to us? Because we are teaching machines to think like we think they ought to think. Is that not right? I never thought that I'd come to the place where I finally understood what this AI business is. We're teaching the machines to make decisions like we think they ought to make. But they say, the people out there in the world say, oh no, these machines are making decisions purely based on the actual circumstances. No, they're making decisions based on how they're taught to make them. Now, they can sure give you a lot of shortcuts and make some beautiful graphics and all that sort of thing. I'm not opposed to any of that, but the point is, of course, that in our lives, we cannot proceed in a fashion that will ultimately please God if we make decisions based on material circumstances. We have to make decisions based on what God says. Obey God, love God, and let that be, it may make no sense to people in the world that we would say, no, I can't do that. I can't take that position. I can't make that business decision. I can't do these things because it goes against my faith in God. And people say, but no, what you're doing, if you allow your faith in God to be the determining factor in what you decide to do, you're going to disadvantage yourself and your children. You're going to get yourself in trouble. You're going to diminish yourself. And what we need to realize, of course, as we do realize, and I know you realize that if we're going to be faithful as children of God, we are going to diminish ourselves in a number of circumstances. We're going to let the other fella have his way. And maybe he even shouldn't have his way. But we're going to let him have his way. John said, beloved, this is 1 John 4:7, beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone that loveth is born of God and knoweth God. He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love. In this was manifested the love of God toward us, because that God sent his only begotten Son into the world, that we might live through him. Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit go back as far as Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15. They made a decision that would diminish deity for the sake of human creation. They made a decision. Jesus diminished himself. He decided he never had to go to the cross. He never had to go. Golgotha was not a predetermined factor. It was a decision based on what he wanted to do for you and for me. Here in his love, not that we love God, but that he loved us, and sent his Son to be the propitiation. Fancy word, means the means by which. It's a sacrifice, the sacrificial lamb for our sins. Beloved, if God so loved us, we ought also to love one another. No man's ever seen God at any time. If we love one another, God dwelleth in us, and his love is perfected in us. There are many passages, there's many ways that we can explain it. We can look at it from a lot of points of view. But the bottom line is, when we choose, we have to make our choices in whatever realm we are working. We have to make our choices based on one factor. What does God want us to do? You know, a few years ago, there was this little thing that went around that got to be real popular. What would Jesus do? Now, what would God have us do? What would God have us do? We're capable of learning, of having in our own minds the decision-making power to follow the will of God. That overwhelms me. Crazy old me. I get to think like God does. And how do I know I'm doing it? How do I know I'm right? He's left us the book. There's not a single decision that we are called upon to make in this life that we don't have information in his book to help us. Now, if I remember correctly, am I about where I need to be? Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you all for being patient with me. When I got here tonight, I had been dumb, which is not the first time that I had been dumb, but I had been dumb and I didn't eat a sandwich before I left the house. So when I got here, I've had one little bag of fruit things and a handful of bitter honeys because I let my blood sugar drop. And don't you fuss at me, because believe me, I've been fussed at. But thank you for your patience, and it's so good to be with you. This great